You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Well, everybody, welcome to the Capitalist Corner on this fantastic Thursday. Well, it's noon, so you can't. Well, I guess it's technically afternoon, so we will say welcome here on this Thursday afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
Oh, don't start showing off already, Valiant.
No, everyone knows that's good afternoon in Spanish, right?
I know what it is, but it gets the feeling that you're very knowledgeable, and I don't know what my point is. I really don't have one. Before coming,
Just trying to mix it up. I'm not showing off.
You can mix it up. I recommend everybody. I still have the great interview with the lovely Persephone is out on my Rational Egoist show. And remember, 2:30 today, Eastern Time. Check out Everyday Ethics. Also with Persephone, I get the feeling she's kind of taken over everything. But that's okay because she is absolutely freaking fantastic. Yeah. Jim, you know what I do sometimes when I'm looking for inspiration? I'll put on the scene from Rocky V, the end of the movie where he fights Tommy Gunn. And when he's down and out and he gets all the flashbacks and then he gets to the scene where Mickey, his manager, tells him, "Get up, you son of a bitch. Mickey loves you." I get goosebumps.
Burgess Meredith, one of the great actors of all time.
You get me in the wrong day, I might start jogging. You know what I mean?
Art can be this huge inspiration. Art is emotional fuel, people. Do not discount the power of art. Don't dismiss it. Art is really, for the conceptual beings that we are, a vital thing.
Now, I feel like there was something else that I wanted to ask you, and now I completely forgot what the hell it was. Do you have any idea what it was that I wanted to ask you about?
No, I'm not psychic. No.
Oh, you're not.
No, I'm not. I possess no special magical powers to access other people's minds.
So there was what got me thinking. We're going to talk about the free speech in the First Amendment first, and what got me thinking about this was there was a brief little story. I get this every day. The 1440. Their claim to fame is that they present just the news and no bias, and evidently the FCC is probing into whether The View, a really poor talk show that's on every day at 11 on ABC. I used to watch it just so I could get myself irritated with the people on there. But evidently they failed to give. They interviewed one person. They interviewed this James Tallarico, who's a Democratic candidate for the Texas Senate, and they didn't interview the person he's running against. So they're claiming the FCC that this violates the equal time doctrine. But evidently shows like The Talk are considered news broadcasts, so they're not subject to it. But anyway, I thought that you and then there was another story about Zuckerberg in court, which we'll get to also.
Well, then there was the Colbert thing, right? He didn't.
There was something with Colbert, where he pulled the fast one and streamed it. He did an interview and streamed it, so
he'd probably get more views than he would on network television. Be subject.
But it got me thinking about the First Amendment and the history of it, and who better to have on than you to talk about this?
Indeed.
So I figured we'd get into a few things. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, why do we even have a First Amendment? Like, what was the concern of the founders that had them put this in there?
There actually was an attempt by the British government to shut down criticism of what was going on, the taxation and so forth, the other abuses that the founding fathers were eventually rebelling against. And there was already then a developed notion of free speech under English common law that the framers grabbed and developed. And of course, this is the Enlightenment. And so we have real philosophers of rights developing at this point. Auberon, Herbert, John Locke, huge influence on the framers and their understanding of what rights were. And so that's why we have the First Amendment, my brother. There were specific abuses by the British government in North America just before and during the Revolution that they wanted to combat. They wanted to protect the ideas of the Enlightenment that were influencing them about individual rights in general. And then they had this English common law perspective that was developing on free speech. And in the history of England, the development of free speech is itself a fascinating history. First, free speech, if you're a member of the House of Commons, became a notion. And then it began to settle in that no. We as Englishmen have this right to free speech. And what are the parameters of that? Does that mean that you can't be sued for defamation? Does that mean that if your speech is harmful? And at first, the idea was what we call in law, prior restraint.
There you go. You jumped right ahead.
It's the next natural thing to talk about.
It is, but for that, I could just say, "Hey, Jim, tell us about the Constitution," and then I could just go to sleep, and you could tell us So I deliberately framed the question as why do we have the First Amendment? My next step was to get to the debates and the parameters. So in my head, I've got this whole plan every single time, and you just come in and you jump ahead and you ruin it. So what I was going to say is, there is this idea of prior restraint where going back to even before this country, back to Blackstone, where the idea was that the government can't pass laws restricting your speech, but they can punish you for it after the fact. So in the United States, when they implement the First Amendment, there's conflicting views. There's you might call it the Hamiltonian Federalist view, which is prior restraint, but they can come get your ass if you say something that they don't like. And then there's the Madisonian Jeffersonian view, which is my preference, which doesn't hold out just to prior restraint. And the thing is, Jim, right? If you have a situation where there's the threat that if you say something, you can be punished, it seems to me that acts as a prior restraint.
It sure does.
Right? So it's sort of like just hocus pocus. But at any rate, I want you to tell me what
historical artifact, because what would happen is in governments is they would before you could publish, you would have to obtain a state license or a royal license even to publish your thing. And that everyone agreed by that point in English American law, that's a bad no-no. But what about speech that is harmful afterwards? And that's why we have to regard rights as a unity. That's why we have to repair to philosophy and guys like John Locke and Thomas Jefferson's more philosophical view of rights. They're a unity. If my speech does in fact violate your rights, say your copyright, or say it actually does defame you and destroy your business when it's based on a lie, well, rights have to be understood in light of other rights. There's no right to violate someone else's rights. Now, short of some violation of some other individual's rights, I should have a complete free speech right. And the First Amendment speaks in big, broad terms about free speech. What is the limitation for freedom of religion? Does that allow you to engage in human sacrifice? No, because you're violating somebody's rights.
Oh, come on. I can't.
No. You see all rights, whether it's freedom of religious practice or freedom of speech, when they run up against another individual's rights, that's the limitation. So I would put it like this. Rights have to be seen in light of other rights and as a logical unity. Without that, you can't make sense of it. Now, today's Supreme Court doesn't do that, of course. They see rights in conflict with other rights, and they have this balancing test in which rights are more important than other fundamental rights that get strict scrutiny versus lesser rights, which get lesser scrutiny, and so forth. That is a corruption. And so what was called the natural rights approach to jurisprudence, I know many objectivists don't like the term because it invokes, say, a religious basis. But what was called natural rights jurisprudence has to be the philosophical way we approach this, not the basic, religious crap, but what was called in the early history of Supreme Court jurisprudence, natural rights approach. when you look at things like the Privileges and Immunities Clause in the body of the Constitution, or the Privileges and Immunities Clause in the 14th Amendment, and you listen to the guys who wrote that language, they meant this broad, open-ended scope of freedoms. They specifically listed some: the right to, travel, the right to have a job, the right to get married, et cetera, et cetera. And then they said, and a bunch of other stuff too. So, and then they put in this Ninth Amendment thingy. And so we have to understand, the only way to understand any of these rights is to see them as a logical unity protecting liberty as such.
I think I'm going to take it as a great compliment that you constantly jump ahead to where I'm going, because you're maybe the smartest guy I know. And given that our thoughts go in the same direction, I think is wonderful. I want to know about my right to block my friends and family who come into the chat and side against me. Maybe that should be a right. But,
well, channel, it is your right.
It is my
property
right.
rights cannot be understood. Free speech cannot be understood outside of, say, for example, property rights. No one has a right to come into my living room and start screaming their politics or religion at me. I can kick them out of the house, and that's not a violation of their free speech or their freedom to exercise religion at all.
And I think you mentioned objectivist and natural rights. I think you and I should do a special episode of this on this topic, and we can pick a fight with the objectivists over whether Ayn Rand's theory of rights is properly within the natural rights tradition, which, by the way, it obviously is. I mean, they say, no, it's not. They're just wrong. And we can make a big fight about it, and it'll be tons of fun.
It would be. But something, a lot of people who were not religious but had this view during the Enlightenment. You can't call Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin Christians. They were really deists.
Yes.
And certain people went even further than that in their aggressive critique of religion at the time, who you'd have to include in the natural rights tradition.
Tom Paine.
And as judges were, Supreme Court justices were developing different approaches to interpretation, the way I would describe that as a philosophy of judicial interpretation, not one necessarily based in religion at all, but a methodological approach to constitutional interpretation. That's what I mean here in this specific context.
By the way, folks, we really appreciate the super chats and the super stickers. They are going toward my tax bill, so that really helps a lot, because I didn't realize that I would have to pay taxes, so I have not been saving for tax day. It turns out, because I thought to myself, I'm thinking, I don't make enough money to have to pay taxes. Turns out, no, I do.
There comes that ugly point when you do.
Yeah, they're coming for you to screw you over. There's a lot of way that the government screws you. One of which was the founding of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. I think it is, and that is who is going to be looking into the view. From whence does the FCC come, Jim, and why? Is it whence or whence means from where, right?
I think so. Yes. Whereas wherefore means why.
Yes.
So
wherefore,
right?
I didn't know that. Thank you very much, Jenna Clean, for the $2 she wants to bring back to Pony Express. The famous line, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? I thought she was saying, where are you?
No,
but then it's why.
Romeo. She's the name, right? As you listen to it.
Yeah, so luckily, when I read Romeo and Juliet and I read Macbeth, I had the little concordance that tells you what the hell these words mean. Because subsequently, I didn't have the concordance, and I tried to read Shakespeare with a regular dictionary and forget it.
Language changes over time, yes.
But either way, where does and why do we have the FCC?
Well, radio broadcasting really hit the world and the United States in the 1920s. And so it really was in the 1920s when the federal government and governments in general were nationalizing the ownership of broadcast frequencies. And this is a little good lesson right here, my friends, about the unity of rights. Property rights are inseparable from civil liberties. Free speech is threatened the minute the government takes ownership of radio broadcast frequencies, which they did in the 1920s. By the 1930s, now we're getting real political teeth put into it. with the Federal Communications Commission. And then, of course, in the 1960s, we actually started developing crap like, the Fairness Doctrine and how television, because now television is a thing after the late 1940s. And by the early 1960s, every home in America had a television practically. And so now the government is saying, aha, what about television news broadcasts? Don't they have to be balanced and fair and all that? And no, the idea is offensive to me as such. And of course, today, although it is meant really to focus on informational sources, Donald Trump is now expanding it as broadly as he possibly can to include entertainment sources, non-news broadcast sources, so that he can go after late-night comedians. Now think about that. So, late night comedians ought to be able to, that's clearly under existing Supreme Court jurisprudence, humor, making fun of, especially politicians, is a dear and protected right in America. But look at this, both sides. You got the left today saying we should have hate speech rules, we should regulate social media for information, for balance. And Donald Trump is perfectly willing to use the FCC to go after his enemies on television, even if it's late night comedy or a talk show with women like The View.
Right.
And so see my point here?
Yes.
You can't have you cannot limit property rights without also limiting all other rights. Nationalize the press and you have a built-in censorship.
So the original purpose was because of the limitations on the airways. That was the original. They said that there's simply not enough room on these airways, that they're limited. So they create the FCC. But that clearly doesn't apply anymore.
Well, but it was nonsense at first.
Right.
Every locality has a variety of AM and then FM broadcast frequencies. So just even in one geographical area of Connecticut, there's this, 94.2, 87.1. So those could compete against one another. So the idea that property, of course, all property in a sense is a monopoly. Physical property, my house is a monopoly in the sense that you can't just come on and trespass and take it and damage it. Property involves a kind of monopoly, if you want to look at it that way, that I can use the force of law to protect. And the idea that there wasn't competition, even back in the earliest days of broadcast frequencies, is utter nonsense. There were a variety of broadcast frequencies available to be competing with one another. That was just a nonsensical argument from the outset. But since they're public property, they have to be used in the public interest, don't you know? And once you sneak in the door of the public interest, that allows them to regulate it.
All right. So
now what the fuck?
What do you think about Trump using this FCC and using these laws to go after these groups?
I think it's
talk shows and whatnot.
That's monstrous. Monstrous. He's so thin-skinned. This is typical of Donald Trump, of course. If you criticize Donald Trump, he must necessarily have a right to come after you because he's so damn thin-skinned. To go enter into politics, one of the great psychological things you should really test for is just how thin-skinned this power luster is, because politicians generally are lying power lusters. But the thicker the skin, the more tolerant they are. And I think of Ronald Reagan because he kind of loosened things up with the FCC and what you could do, and then the advent of cable television as opposed to broadcast television. So he was so thick-skinned. It was like, oh, there you go again. And he famously said in the debate. Now, what you want is a politician at least more like that, who's got some thick skin and realizes being in politics means you have to take some verbal punches, and Trump doesn't like that. And so Trump is actually trying to increase. His FCC chairman would love to censor all broadcast.
Anyone that disagrees with Trump.
So I am a free speech absolutist. And by that, I do not mean that all other rights take a back seat. What I mean is a free speech absolutist within the context of a unitary understanding of what rights are, a protection of each individual's equal right. So if I have an equal right to property and free speech, that defines the limits, but only within those limits. Otherwise, I'm a total free speech absolutist, as we say.
Yes. Welcome Lee to the show. Lee was mad at me and didn't want to tune in, so I video called her while we were on, and she's tuned in now. So we have Lee. The universe is now in good order.
Aligned.
Right. A universe is aligned. What's that thing you Mercury what retrograde?
It can't be Mercury.
We don't want that.
It
So what about this idea of going after Zuckerberg, I guess, is testifying today, and they're claiming that these apps are breeding addiction. What's your thoughts on that in relation to the First Amendment?
Well, you see, what they're claiming is in a civil suit, harm. What you did is harm my kid. Okay, so the question is a matter of causation. Did you violate some legal responsibility? And did that violation of responsibility proximately cause harm? And so it's a civil case. It's not the government necessarily going after it. It's parents whose kids committed suicide going after Zuckerberg for harming their kids. Zuckerberg says that, 13, we clearly have a rule that 13-year-olds and younger can't, because they're going to go through all the response by the plaintiff attorney was a good one. So 13-year-olds are going to read all the conditions, terms, and, if adults can't go through all these terms and conditions, how you expect a 13-year-old or younger to do that? And it's really bad. But look, there's a role for government to protect children from physical abuse. Sure. That is absolutely the case. When it comes to moral questions, psychological questions, I'm very skeptical of government having any sort of law that would come in to interfere. Bad parenting cannot be, and I'm not accusing these particular parents who are the plaintiffs in this case. Don't confuse me with that. But look, bad parenting is not an excuse for a government foot in the door for all kinds of censorship. Because once you go down that path of educational and psychological things with children, where does it stop? You've again opened up the door to a whole new set of potential abuses.
So Gary Menard says with a $4.99 super chat, thank you so much, Gary. He says the more authoritarian a government becomes, the more threatened by comedians it becomes. Good point.
Good point.
$2 from Robert Nacer. Eat it, Joe's. I don't know why, but all right, we'll go with it. Kilroy was here. More from Robert Nacer. Isn't Kilroy the name of the robot in the Stick song?
In World War II, there was a slogan that they would paint on things. Kilroy was here. In other words, the American Army was here. I think that's
okay.
But that's just my...
But Kilroy is also the name of the robot in, what the hell, the Stick song, Mr. Roboto. Another $2 from Robert. Your message here. Okay. So... in my view, Jim, a problem does arise, and I'm with you. I'm a free speech guy, and I'm not for these types of lawsuits. But if there's evidence, and I don't know if there is in this case, that companies deliberately do this, they know that it's going to cause these problems, and they lie about it. That's where the problem for me comes in. If they don't lie, then caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. But if they're lying and they say, no, there's no evidence that this can happen when they actually believe there is, that is a problem for me. Legally, is that relevant, though?
Well, it depends on what you want there to be, what you want the civil law, the harms caused in civil law to include. If I can sue you, for example, for defamation, even if I'm telling the truth, that would be going too far because I have a right to do that. Similarly here, if the breach of duty in a civil case is going beyond something, simply my exercise of my rights to broadcast something on a social media platform, then I would be on Zuckerberg's side. That's why they're using children. I mean, have adults been harmed in various ways by social media? Yeah. In the 1990s, when the internet was getting started, they basically gave this huge immunity to social media platforms for what people were saying on social media. Individuals would post on social media platforms. I think that real harm should be, I mean, if you're like you say, if you are aware of something going on, the comparison people use is like the cigarette companies.
That's what I
Cigarette
was thinking.
companies
Yeah.
would testify before Congress, oh, it's not addictive. No, it's not addictive. When in fact, they already had good scientific studies saying it was addictive. And then they were out there lying through their teeth
Yeah.
under oath to Congress that it was addictive. But addictive, I mean, look, coffee might be addictive. Does that mean I can sue, Folgers Coffee Company?
If only.
If only, right? So I am responsible for the addictions that I subject myself to, and certainly that's true for adults. Now the question is there some kind of addiction that kids get that is actually causing kids harm, and that creates, of course, the need for, look. I believe that civil liability has gone way out of hand, and a lot of ways to control that are, for example, liability waivers. But those are contracts. How can children engage? And if you're under 18, there's no valid contract. You cannot engage in a valid contract if you're under 18. So how do these terms and conditions even apply to minors, it would seem to me, because they can't engage in valid contracts. And so liability waivers, which would normally limit, in my ideal world, civil liability for adults in product liability or a dozen other kinds of civil cases, really are inapplicable to kids. If kids are being harmed and can demonstrate that people can demonstrate that kids are being harmed, that opens yourself up to civil liability, at least theoretically. If you can get past, for example, the internet liability, immunity that social media companies, for good or ill, were given back in the 1990s.
Robert, with $5 more in super chats, wants to know if St. Patrick should be sued for automobile accidents which follow from excessive drinking, or on St. Patrick's Day, or do we sue the church in general?
This is where the concept of proximate cause comes in, right? We ask ourselves, did I cause your harm? And St. Patrick, of course, is long since dead.
Now you're going to let me show off for just a second here.
Here we go.
Okay, so in law, there's two types of harm. There's actual cause and proximate cause. So an actual cause would be, I rip Jim's shirt, Jim takes off down the street, Jim notices the rip, so he's paying attention to that, and then crashes. I would be part of the causal chain, but I would not be the proximate cause of the accident. Jim's hyper-focus on the shirt would be the proximate cause. And in tort law, you have four things. You have to have a duty, a breach that causes harm. So you have to show that the company or the person has a duty, they've breached that duty, and the breach of that duty was the proximate cause of your harm. Now, Jim, I got to say, I loathe the idea, and thank you very much, Greg, for the $1.99 super sticker. I loathe the appeal always to the children. I think it's cheap, and I think it's an obvious tactic because nobody wants to be the one who says, oh, I don't care if the kids get harmed, right?
Yeah, who cares about kids, right?
Right. So it's an immediate appeal to emotionalism.
It is.
But in a free society, there's always risks, and you can't get rid of those risks by legislation. It's just not going to happen. I shouldn't even have said a free society. I should have said life entails risk. And government cannot legislate away risks.
No.
Parents, and I know it's hard, but they need to be accountable for how their children spend their time.
Exactly. Look, if you don't want your kid to, under 13, come on, you just say, no, look, if parents were in more control of education, for example, if we had a separation of state and education, parents would be fully responsible for the kind of schools their kids went to, whether they could have cell phones at school, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want cell phones permitted at the school where I send my kid, period, end of report, or just a cell phone where I can, because it does increase safety. Kids can, check in with their parents. I like that aspect of a cell phone communication, but there's got to be something. The market would respond to that. But the first thing a parent should do is just simply limit computer and phone access for their kids. Good parenting consists of, It would be the same with a whole bunch of other things. If you're not limiting your kid's diet, you know, look, you know, you have to be a good parent, and that means supervising your kid to a certain degree. Now, I don't like these helicopter parents, and I really am grateful I lived in a world where my parents would kind of let me go out and scrape my own knee so I could learn and interact with my peers and on the block. That's a good thing. On the other hand, is it really even still the parents' response? You be home by this period of time. You don't do this, etc.
I think my parents went a little too far. My parents had the let you go out and commit your own burglaries philosophy.
See, that's really bad parenting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I tell you, I came home one time. We had been breaking into cars. I think I was 14, and we didn't know what the hell we were doing. So we just got a lot of knickknacks and shit that people left in their cars. And I went home and I told my mother, and my mother told my father. His name's Billy. She says, Billy, he's breaking into cars. And my father says, well, if he's good at it, fuck it. So,
oh, God. See, I had the parents that were moral, you know, and really strict about it. So they first inculcated me with this sense of, what are you doing if you're harming someone? What are you doing if you're hitting this other kid? In fact, even acting in self-defense, maybe this is Christianity filtering through, but even using force in perfectly reasonable self-defense had me as a kid shaking in emotional distress. I had the opposite end of the spectrum.
What about when you beat up that guy in New York?
I'm sorry?
Oh, you heard me just fine, sir. You beat up that guy in New York.
I didn't beat up anybody. Someone was trying to rob me, and I acted in self-defense.
Did you beat him up or not, Jim?
I did not.
What'd you do?
I kneed him in the face.
You knee someone in the face, that's beating him up. Did the guy go down?
Well, he was trying to rob me.
You still beat him up. I wanted to know if you felt guilt afterwards.
Not a lick, but I did regret what I did, because a few days later, a bunch of his friends came and beat the holy tar out of me. So,
well, Jim, sometimes you get what you're looking for in this world. I'm just saying. We have Enric with a $4.99 super chat. 1950s comic book, 1960s TV, 80s music lyrics, 90s video games. Now social media is destroying the youth. Unfortunately, yes.
The kids.
Yes.
When the minds of a kid are really not the role of government to protect or regulate. I'm going to say that, you know, you can have all the obscenity laws in the world you want. Minors are still, I mean, I remember as a kid, you're going to find your dad's Playboy, or you're going to get something out of the trash bin, and the little boys are going to go behind the garage, and they're going to check out the Playboy magazine. And there's nothing under the sun that you can do to prevent kids from accessing obscenity.
Jim, you're giving away our secrets now. I don't know if this is...
Not much of a secret, I think, socially speaking. Okay.
I don't even think they have magazines anymore, right?
Do they have magazines anymore?
I don't know. I don't, because now you just have not porn magazines. Persephone, they have them. Oh, Persephone saying yes, they do. So evidently, Persephone is a big reader of the
newsstands and bookstores. You know, I go into the local Barnes and Noble, and they have a big newsstand with all these magazines.
Yeah, but do they have I think Playboy doesn't have print magazines anymore.
I have no idea. I honestly talk about being out of the loop like a boomer.
Persephone, she seems to know. I don't know. Maybe she's got. You know, let's bring her on for just a second here. Persephone, you're a big reader of the Playboy magazine situation?
No, I just happen to know that they do still make print magazines.
No, they do, but porn is what we're talking about.
Yes, I know that they still make porn mags.
Okay, so Persephone loves porn. That's the that's the lesson that we can glean from this.
Say, Mr. Leibowitz.
Gary Menard says, how the hell did Jim know about the Playboy pipe behind my friend's garage?
It is a common phenomenon. Let me suggest that little boys will be little boys, and that this has become a social cliche that no one is, I hope, unaware of.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's too much, but I'll share it anyway because I just don't care. So when we were little kids, my neighbor gave me stacks of pornography. I must have been 10, 11. I don't know. Certainly too young to be having these stacks of pornography. But my mother, probably just happy that, I'm not gay, was, okay with me having this. In the back of these magazines, I'll never forget it. We come across these advertisements for these the penis enlargers. So you order this, we will guarantee. And I was in 5th grade, I know, because when we were in class, my teacher, we were the sex education stuff, and he said, there's these advertisements. He brought it up. He says these articles, these advertisements say that they, you can, grow your penis. He says it's absolute bullshit. And I just remember thinking, well, doesn't that just suck? when I found out that this stuff doesn't actually work. But that's what I was doing when I was 10. I don't know.
The thing about it, when I first heard about it, I'm like, I ain't, no way anyone's going to be messing with my junk, okay? One way or another. I mean, in a non-sexual way. No one's going to be changing surgically or altering please keep your medicines and
so you've
devices.
Seen you saw the advertisements in the magazine.
Yeah, I was familiar with those at a pretty young age.
Yeah. All right. So off the porn now to poor Persephone's dismay.
Well, but it's relevant to free speech.
No, it is. Larry Flint found that out when he sued. Who did he sued Jerry Falwell, or did Jerry Falwell?
Jerry Falwell sued him because he ran a cartoon that showed Jerry Falwell in an unflattering way with his mother, implying that Jerry Falwell, the famous leader of the moral majority and a Christian evangelist, was behind the barn with his own mom. But that Supreme Court said, no, you can criticize public figures. And the Supreme Court recognizes that defamation laws, which is what he sued under, have free speech implications. Now, and so in the famous case of New York Times versus Sullivan, for example, they said, the defamation laws run up against free speech. And how we're going to do that? Well, it's ordinary negligence in the sense of two ordinary people suing for, one more person suing another. When it's a public figure, you have to prove actual malice. That is to say, either a conscious disregard for the truth or actual lying. I know it's a lie. In the case of a public figure, they've expanded that from politicians to anyone who's a public figure, and I'm not sure that makes any sense. But in any case, it has to be a lie. You have to prove, unlike other civil suits, for example, you have to prove damages, the harm that it causes as part of the elements of the offense. That's a technical legal term. Normally, we just prove you did something wrong, and then we'll determine how much harm you caused later in the damages phase. Not so with defamation. Defamation, you have to upfront show that there was harm to even get through the door. And demonstrable economic harm is normally the way they do it. And it has to be an actual lie. But you'll notice it's a private lawsuit. It's not the government, someone proving actual harm, and it has to actually be a lie. So defamation laws are exactly that. And
for public figures, you have to know it's a lie, right?
You either have to know it's a lie or act with conscious disregard for the truth.
Okay. So I want to pivot now. Now, you mentioned earlier the unity of rights. Now, I don't know if I want to phrase it this way, but I'm going to. The fundamental implementation of the right to life is the right to property, or a necessary corollary of the right to life is the right to property. Probably be a better way to put this. So there's an article in Reason magazine about something that I've been opposed to for a while. It's the civil asset forfeiture laws. And what happened here in Oklahoma City is the police department, this is from Reason magazine, the police department is the latest law enforcement agency exposed for mishandling forfeited money. Former city attorney Orville Jones blew the whistle, accusing the city of participating in a nefarious scheme to divert forfeiture proceeds into police coffers instead of returning property to owners or using it to reimburse victims in the courts. So, Jim, I do want to get to the Mises and Hayek stuff, but I want to spend a couple minutes on this. What is civil asset forfeiture, and what's wrong with it?
The government can seize property if it thinks it is in any way related to a drug transaction without necessarily getting a drug conviction. So, independently of me proving that you possessed heroin with intent to sell it, I can seize cash that I find in your home or if they were in there for some valid reason, or in your vehicle or on your person. They just seize the property, whether or not there's an actual criminal conviction. Now, I don't like drug laws in general. The possession of, I don't care if you possess fentanyl or heroin, people ought to be able to engage in suicidal behavior if they're doing it themselves. So the mere possession of some substance, or the ingestion of some substance, or the selling of some substance ought to be legal, ought to really be legal. Now, what's really pernicious about this is that the seizure of these assets doesn't necessarily bear any relationship to the drug conviction itself. Now think about that, people. And do you think that's going to lead to abuse? Do you think many people are going to have their money or property stolen? And then I'm going to use the word stolen by the government outright, that totally innocent, had nothing to do with drug sales, and the assets still get stolen, and government still doesn't need to convict you of any kind of crime. Now that is obscene, but it's one of the obscene results of this bloody war on drugs. And all of our rights are threatened when you step away from this unitary understanding of rights, by the way. When you step away from that and government systematically starts violating people's rights, guess what? It's a chain reaction of rights violations. But civil asset forfeiture, and that's what it is. They say, again, as with immigration laws, your first deportation is just a civil administrative thing, so they can bypass basically the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment normal protections on these things. Again, the government can bypass things by calling it asset forfeiture. That has nothing to do with an actual criminal conviction. Right. And so there are dozens and hundreds, thousands of cases of people who had nothing to do with the trafficking of drugs who are getting their money stolen. In my view, it shouldn't matter. They should legalize this black market, because the black market is what's killing people. Subsidizing organized crime, getting people to die from corrupted overdoses, because you can't measure the quantity or quality of the drugs you're getting. Why? Because it's illegal. When I walk into a pharmacy, I get the precise purity, the precise chemical. Why? Market forces. Again, it doesn't really have anything to do with the FDA either. The FDA doesn't keep our medicines safe any more than the Federal Aviation Administration keeps plane traffic safety safe or not. It is the free market that does that. And if the free market can't do it, regulations can only make problems. And so, but there's this whole idea of property. In the 5th and 14th Amendments, we talk about life, liberty, and property, the formulation of John Locke, and that is no accidental overlap. Liberty and property are right there as the applications of the right to life. The right to life implies the right to generally liberty, the right to property, and those are all interconnected. But again, in the history of law, we have a tradition that says that the government, originally the Crown of England, of course, in America and Great Britain, can go after a thing regardless of its jurisdiction over the person. So it's called in rem. Well, take, for example, in the 1930s, when FDRC said there could be no private ownership of gold. Gold was the thing. Government can seize gold, and it's your possession of gold. I don't care whether it's gold that they're preventing people from having, or drugs that they're preventing people from having. It's not what you think are the proceeds from a drug transaction, or with or without a criminal conviction of the person. See, once you take that away, once you say that it's the thing that the government has a proper right to go after, you've in effect opened the door to a systematic violation of property rights.
I've had arguments, debates, discussions with objectivists. When I've said, because it's common for people to say COVID was the biggest rights violations in American history, and I say no. The war on drugs is far broader and has caused far more damage. But people tend to look at this very myopically, and they'll say, "Oh, no, because doing drugs is immoral, so banning it isn't as bad as what happened under COVID." The problem is banning the drugs doesn't stop at drug dealers, and it doesn't stop even at drug addicts. It opens up everybody to this kind of stuff, where if you have too much cash on you, they deem that suspicious now. You should
Right.
not have, it's not illegal. I could have $10 million in cash. That's not illegal, but they would deem it suspicious, and that would be an excuse to take my shit.
Yeah, see, that's exactly it. You're right, and I'll phrase it like this: the the harm caused by the war on drugs far exceeds the death. You want to talk about casualty numbers? The casualty numbers from the war on drugs far exceeds what COVID did. Now, COVID was deadly. Don't get me wrong, and it was more systematically totalitarian. Out here in California, we were basically under house arrest. Businesses were, whole shops.
Oh,
were,
it's horrible. I'm not saying it's not.
in terms of my whole life, so you get this from objectivists, because objectivists say, look, I don't do drugs, and so since I don't do drugs, it was the COVID lockdown that shut down my business and prevented me from basically leaving my house that was much more onerous. So I will distinguish two things here. Was it more totalitarian in its scope? In one sense, the COVID lockdown was in scope more totalitarian. However, when you line up the casualty figures, the death toll, there ain't nothing that has killed more people improperly than this bloody effing war on drugs. Talk about people getting shot in drive-by shootings, children being shot in drive-by shootings. That's just one example. Or organized crime wars protecting their drug turf, or I could go on and on and on. But of course, even the people who use drugs are being killed, not because of the lethality of the drugs. The lethality of the drugs is a result of it being unlawful. Like I say, I can go into a pharmacy, buy a month's supply worth of aspirin for a teeny little price, mind you, and be assured of its quantity, quality. And if it isn't, then I can sue them, sue their ass. So they take real care to make sure that the drugs that I buy over the counter in a pharmacy are the amount and the purity that they're claiming it to be. Not so with your local drug dealer, okay? They might not even know the quantity and the purity of the drugs you're getting. So I'm buying something that I think is a Valium, and but it turns out to have some laced with fentanyl in it or something. How does that happen, ladies and gentlemen? It's the war on drugs. We're killing not only users of drugs, even casual users of drugs, much less addicts, but we're also killing all kinds of innocent people. We're subsidizing organized crime. We're corrupting law enforcement. I can go on and on and on. The death toll from this bloody war on drugs exceeds the death toll from COVID. And yes, even if you don't do drugs because you're morally responsible and therefore the COVID lockdown hit you harder, you have to look at the actual facts on the table. The facts on the table is that this war on drugs has been a slaughter and caused by the law itself, far more than any drug out there.
Well said, Jim. I think that the audience should be very impressed that Jim is not only an expert on Playboy magazine, but about the purities and impurities of Valium. That's a very impressive scope of knowledge, sir. Let me.
I am quite knowledgeable.
So there was a good article in the American Institute for Economic Research about Hayek and Mises. Now, this is another issue where I sometimes run into disagreements with objectivists. Objectivists rightly, in my view, point out that the more important argument for capitalism are their moral arguments. I agree. But that doesn't negate the importance of economic arguments. And even Ayn Rand said so when she's, recommending Mises and recommended Carl Schneider's book, Capitalism, the Creator. The thing
she recommended Mises's books, Hazlitt's books.
Yes.
In her publication, they ran very positive reviews of several of Mises's and Economics in One Lesson. I could go on.
Yes.
Ayn Rand herself was personal friends with Henry Hazlitt, and who introduced her to Ludwig von Mises, and they got to know each other. Mises praised Atlas Shrugged. Ayn Rand attended Mises's economics seminar. And so Ayn Rand understood the value of economics, that you can't divorce the facts from your moral arguments. In fact, the two are intimately related. To disconnect economics from morality would be a mistake, an objectivist mistake, my objectivist friends. Now, that doesn't change the fact that moral arguments are the ones that win the day. People are perfectly willing to put up with all kinds of suffering if they think it's morally justified, which is crazy,
Right.
of course. That's the theory practice dichotomy in its deadly action. But the point is that the good is good in effect because it's pro-life in all of its implications. If there was some problem, contradiction there, that's a contradiction in your head you better work out.
Right. So you were just teetering on crossing the line to my next point, but I think that you sufficiently held back, maybe hinting or intimating or foreshadowing the what's the word for when you foreshadow something? You there's a word and I can't remember. God, that sucks. But either way, if there truly is, right, we argue that there is no dichotomy between theory and practice, between the moral and the practical, right? And to me, what economists like Mises, Hayek, even Milton Friedman do is demonstrate the truth of that. Suppose, for instance, that Keynes was right, that the capitalist system is fundamentally unstable, that there's a tendency toward overproduction that leads to business crashes and the government needs to step in. Suppose he's right about that. Well, then it's not in my interest to have a free market because the free market is unstable. It creates a split between my moral theory and the facts.
Something's wrong here. Either my moral theory is wrong or my economics is wrong, and it's a contradiction that I better work out. Okay?
Right.
Contradictions don't exist in reality. They only exist in the minds of confused or ignorant people.
Yes. So when Mises demonstrates unequivocally that socialism, he said, is not only inefficient, he said it's literally impossible. And what he meant by that is, first of all, you need prices, and prices are only in a private market. If everything's owned by one unit, as they are in socialism, there's no competition, there's no buying and selling, and so you don't get prices, and the prices demonstrate the preferences of the people in the society, so you know what portent, by the way, was the word I was trying to think of.
Yes.
You know what needs to be produced with reasonable certainty. Obviously, you can make mistakes, but the signals are all there. And Mises shows that in a purely socialist system, calculation would be impossible.
Possible.
Yeah, the Soviets and other socialist countries that have existed had relatively free economies that they could look to kind of gauge things.
Gauge prices.
But if everything is socialist, then you don't have that.
There can be no coordination.
Yes, and Hayek, went even further in explaining that the knowledge problem, that knowledge in society is so dispersed, it's impossible for one agency or one planning department to have all the necessary information.
Supercomputer, no AI could possibly. I will one up Hayek with the latest technology. No AI, no supercomputer could possibly, because it changes every day and individual to individual. I could wake up tomorrow and say, you know something, I want to try X, and that will incrementally, I know I'm just one of 300 million consumers in this country, but incrementally alter the whole picture. If there is enough people incrementally doing that, then it will change the whole picture, hour to hour, day by day, based on people's changing tastes. That
can happen. I might be in the mood for a coffee at 11:30 and then change my mind at 12.
Exactly right.
Phil.
It's possible. But you know what happens is people like Friedman and will say, well, then we can have, guaranteed income or maybe certain price controls. And so what you're doing, if like Hayek or Friedman, you totally divorce ethics and economics, even Mises gave them the license to do this by saying this is a value free. And I understand why he was doing it. He was trying to make it scientific. And scientific meant in those days without, absent considerations of moral value, because David Hume, who we were talking about the last time I was on the show, had undermined their confidence in moral reasoning. Once Hume and by the way, Hume was
fuck Hume. Can we say fuck Hume?
We can say it. And he was a friend of Adam Smith. Now think about that.
Yeah.
And what Hume was doing at the very height of the Enlightenment was undercutting people's confidence, especially in moral reasoning, saying you can't get an ought from an is in any rational way. And so scientists thereafter have been trying to make their subject scientific by making it value-free. Now, Mises himself did that, not because he didn't believe in morality or have moral values. He loved Atlas Shrugged, as I say. But the point is, to make his economics scientific, he insisted it was value-free. Well, what does that do? That opens the door to people like Friedman and even Hayek to say, well, I'm not morally opposed to certain government interventions. You see the chain reaction there.
I do. Phil, thank you so much. 50-pound super sticker from Phil 3572. Highly, highly appreciated. So I'm going to do two things now. First, I'm going to disagree with Jim, and then I'm going to piss off everybody in the objectivist community. Mises says over and over again that there can be no objective morality.
Yes.
He says it in Theory and History. He says it in Human
does.
Action. He intimates it in The Ultimate Foundations of Economic Science.
But he does have I didn't say he didn't have a morality. He did. He said there can be no rational scientific.
Yeah, he just thought it was a matter of preference.
Right.
Right. So there was an economist coming out of the Austrian school who learned from Ayn Rand very much so, who thought that values, excuse me, morality was essential to discuss these topics. And I'm just going to say his name and let Jim expand on the topic. One Murray Norris Rothbard. Go ahead, Jim. Give Rothbard some praise.
Murray and Rothbard actually developed an ethics-based theory of liberty. And in fact, you can hear it, the title of his book, The Ethics of Liberty. So he actually believed that he was converted to a rights theory and indeed an Aristotelian orientation by his reading of Ayn Rand and his familiarity with Ayn Rand starting in early to mid 1950s when he was exposed. Ayn Rand moved to New York in 1951, and she began, of course, she was still in her social circle, and that began to have an influence on Mises's American students. And so a number of Mises's American students, like George Reisman or Murray Rothbard, became moralists because they believed morality could be put on an objective basis if we used Aristotelian methodology. And rights theory would be consistent with, and in fact, the correct explication and application of economics properly understood. That little property rights thingy, when you understand rights as a unity, when you understand rights as the implication of the needs of human life, understanding that, understanding Ayn Rand's whole approach, there are no necessary conflicts of interest between people who respect each other's rights, between rational men. There really can be no conflict of interest. What a bold argument Ayn Rand was making there. There's, in fact, a harmony of interests that comes about. Now, economists, in their own way, have been explaining why there's a harmony of interests, believe it or not, in the economic sphere. Ayn Rand said that applies to everything, to romance, everything else in life. There's a harmony of interests when people are rational and free. Freedom, first of all, encourages rationality. You can be just as irrational as you want and jump off a building thinking you can fly, but freedom, and that's part of it too. People have to be able to say, look, what are the consequences? If the government is constantly putting this safety net under you for a variety of safety reasons, they're preventing people from thinking through the consequences of their own conduct. But in any case, getting back to what you're saying, Murray Rothbard believed you could have an objective morality. He lifted much from Ayn Rand and gave her insufficient credit, in my view.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And he poorly developed his own
and it was
theory.
Largely a rationalistic one.
Right. I just wanted to. Look, I could have went with Reisman. But that wouldn't have been nearly as controversial. So I went with Rothbard. Yes.
You talk about someone detached from the facts of reality.
Yes.
And in my view, but besides, his whole argument is largely a rationalistic one.
Well, he starts with axioms and deduces from axioms. Yeah.
And that was Mises's whole approach. If you have these axioms, basically you can deduce the whole of the science of praxeology, says Ludwig von Mises. It's really interesting to see Ayn Rand's margin notes in her own copy of Human Action. Ayn Rand read
Yeah,
Human Action and wrote margin notes to it.
I want to say real quickly that my own interpretation. Now, I agree with you about Mises, but the way that I think could have solved it, and I'm nowhere near the epistemologist or methodologist where I could do this myself, but I do think that through induction, you can form concepts, and you can run the psychological experiments, the mental experiments Mises talked about, and imagine different situations and come to conclusions based on it. But that wouldn't be pure deduction. Either way, it's time for you, sir, to give the capitalist thought of the day.
Ooh, wow. I'm going to go back to what I was saying before. Rights form a logical unity. Rights form a logical unity. Civil liberties, such as freedom of speech and freedom of religious exercise, cannot be separated from property rights and economic rights. What rights are attempting to do is to guarantee through law, through a legal system, the moral truth that all human interaction should be voluntary and that physical coercion should be banned from human society. The only way to implement that, legally speaking, is with a doctrine of rights. And so the way to understand capitalism is to understand it as the system that protects individual rights, including property rights.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking this gig today on short notice. Really appreciate it. My question for everybody, go to YouTube and answer the question, who is your favorite economist? That's my question. Who's your favorite economist?
You know something? You never follow up. Last time it was, who's your favorite founding father? And Jefferson was getting a bunch of votes there. So
what do you mean I don't follow up? I do. Well, I go there and look. What do you need me to do?
But when you get to this point, you should talk about the last question and look at the answers. Give people some credit for,
Okay, that's what we're going to do, but we can't do it with Jim on because he talks too much and he takes us overboard, so I don't have time. No, I'm just kidding. Jim, you, of course, are correct about that. That's a great idea, and we'll do that from now on. Matter of fact, we're going to start that policy tomorrow, but until then, check your premises.